Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a bit wobbly today, but it is Friday. So it's so nice to see everybody come here today and lots of people that I know. So I just wondered, because there's not too many of us, do you think we could just pop round and see, apart from our speakers, who I'll introduce as they're coming up, but just pop round and see who you are and where you work, because then when we're having lunch, people know who to target. Is that okay? So could we start, if that's all right with you?
I'm Julie and I'm a childcare assistant. I work at Bury Hospice.
Thank you, Julie.
I'm Sue, I'm registered nurse at Bury Hospice and we're just setting up a new outreach community service
Oh, brilliant.
in the infancy stage.
I'm Carol and I work at Bury Hospice and I'm part of the outreach service.
Lovely.
I'm Julie and I work for the district nurses out of hours service in North Manchester.
Smashing. Thank you very much.
And we've also work here at Springfield Hospice on complementary therapies. I'm Debbie, I'm the staff nurse in Day Hospice here at Springfield. I'm a healthcare assistant in the Day Hospice at Springfield.
I'm Trisha, I work here at the Day Hospice as well as Springfield and staff nursing.
And I'm Jean, I'm a nursing assistant here at the Day Hospice.
Thank you. At the back.
Andrea, I'm the commissioning manager for End of Life Care and Palliative Care at Salford CCG.
Oh, thank you.
Michelle Henderson, I'm a project commission manager for HMR CCG.
I'm Susan Holt, I'm the HMR Macmillan Recovery Planner for the Community Services.
Lovely. Thank you.
I'm Jackie Orsted from Northern Care Alliance, project lead doing my 10 CPR for the trust. I'm Tracy Acton, the practice development coordinator for Dr. Kershaw's hospice.
I'm Pauline Brownlee, I'm the spiritual care and bereavement support nurse at Dr. Kershaw's hospice.
I'm Sue Bain, I'm sister on hospice at Dr. Kershaw's hospice.
Thank you. At the back.
I'm Savannah, a student nurse from Salford Uni, currently on placement here.
I'm Carol, I'm a nurse here at the hospice.
Thank you.
I'm Shelley, I'm a project officer with the Health and Social Care Partnership in Greater Manchester, working with Palliative and End of Life Care.
I'm Christine Taylor, project manager for the Foster and Brownfield
It's such a mouthful, isn't it? Hello, I'm Susan. I'm Palliative Care Social for local authority at Bolton, but based at Bolton Hospice.
Thank you.
And I'm Sharon, I'm the same as this.
All right. Okay. And I'll introduce the speakers as they come along. So thank you for that. So basically, we've got, just so everybody remembers, we've got Bury, Spring Hill, Selection, Dr. Kershaw's, a bit more Spring Hill, and Bolton and SCN, and then we've got Blokes.
Oh,
Oh, is it?
You know how you cornered is just like you lot sit on
You slot sit there, yeah. Thank you very much. Right, we'll just do first of all, just do the housekeeping as we do need to do. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if there is a fire, there's doors here and here, and obviously where you came in, as you were coming into this part of the building, there's a door on the right hand side, and we would congregate in the car park. Obviously we're at the front of the hospice, but we're not expecting one today, so it should be okay. Toilets, just as you're coming into this part of the building, there's one on each side there, and then there's two that says patients' toilets actually on this corridor, but they're not in use for patients today, so it's quite okay to use those. We do have an artist. Where's he gone?
He's going to the bathroom.
Has it? We do have an artist, and throughout the day, he's going to be obviously doing some pictures. You can see the ones from the last lectures. So we've done 8 up until now. This is the last 2 lectures that we're doing today. You can see the other ones that they've done on the board there. Please go and ask them questions. And if there's a point that comes up during the day you think is particularly interesting, have a talk with them and they can make sure they get it on the board then. Is that okay? So, that's the artist. We have got a buffet on at lunchtime, so that'll be around 11:45, 12 o'clock. and it'll be in the main corridor there, and then hopefully you can all have you know, do a bit of networking and get some ideas from other areas. It's always good, isn't it? Hopefully the weather will be fine, so you can go and sit out in the garden, or at least stretch your legs, get a bit of fresh air or something out there. And lastly, we are filming, as you may have noticed today. So please, if you need to leave the room, please try and do it. You can do army crawl or something to get out. And can I just ask that all mobile phones, Lisa, could you just go in the office and get my mobile phone and switch it on, please? Just remembered. So yeah, if we could just do it with as little disruption as possible. We understand that you may need to leave the room, and that's quite okay. Okay, so as I said, this is the last 2 lectures in the Inequalities series, and today we're looking at connecting and interacting with people of the BME community, and in this area, and I know sort of Bolton and so on, there is a high proportion of people from the South Asian community that make up those communities. So we're very lucky to have Shahid and Akhlar here this morning to talk to you, and then we've got Michael that's come all the way from sunny Wales from Marie Curie there to speak later this morning. So without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce Shahid, who I've been working with on a fairly regular basis over the years, haven't I? So can I introduce you? It is a bit wobbly, so don't lean on it. I've lost a leg.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Jane, for inviting me. Sorry, I'm a bit stiff this morning. I managed to hurt my back last Sunday. It's my first day out since going into A&E, so I've done it especially for you, Jane. Made an effort. I'm going to talk about my personal experience accessing end-of-life care for my mother who had dementia. So I'm not here in my professional capacity, so forgive me, I'm going to be reading off a kind of pre-prepared thing, which is what I have to do when I talk about mum and kind of very personal issues. Just to clarify something, Jane, you said, you know, we're talking about BAME or BME issues. So BME, BAME, Black Asian multi-ethnic, I'm of a South Asian heritage, British, Pakistani, so I'm talking very much from a Pakistani perspective as opposed to a BME, Black multi-ethnic. So, thank you very much again, Jane. So I'd worked in the public sector for over 24 years, and in 2012, roughly, my mother's mental and physical health began to deteriorate, which kind of led me to give up full-time employment in the public sector, and I became a full-time carer, a role I shared with my wife. And during this time, I kind of set about on a campaign to engage with the South Asian community in Rochdale, and also with healthcare professionals, and that's probably when I came, in touch with you, Jane, as well, to start a process of raising awareness of dementia and end-of-life care, because of the personal challenges that I and my family faced. I believe that I was one of the very few, if any, Asian Muslim families who decided to access specialist dementia care for my mum. And that's been the main carer for my mother. It was a decision that I tormented over for a very long time. And while caring for mum was very rewarding, but it was a hugely challenging experience for me and my family. We found that as her health worsened, it was taking its toll on myself, my wife and my children. But considering a dementia care home for mum wasn't easy given religious and cultural expectations. Placing mum in a specialist dementia care home, it was a decision that I didn't take lightly or quickly, and I did consult with my siblings who, and I'll give an analogy. Someone on Twitter mentioned, I'm sure Clark would relate to this, and she described it as, I think, seagull management. So whilst we were caring for mum, So I'm the youngest in my family. Relatives' family would come round once in a blue moon, on Eid, or Mother's Day. Kind of, excuse the expression, but crap everywhere, and leave us to deal with the emotional trauma that we had to then deal with once they left, because Mum was like, where have they all gone? So that's something that we kind of dealt with. But I also sought advice from a Muslim scholar, an Imam, a Mufti, just to ask whether what we were doing was the right thing or not. And there was only him sort of, endorsing what we were doing, because he could see that we were struggling as a family. So he said, Shahid, according to scripture, and I've consulted the hadith, the kind of rulings on this, is that you are permitted to seek help for your mum, and if that means putting her into a dementia care home, then that's fine. But just to add something, once Mum was in the dementia care home, I do recall a social worker, Mum's social worker, and one of the care home staff saying to me, Shahid, it's very rare that we see South Asian Muslim individuals in care homes. It's not something that you do regularly as a community, is it? Because you look after your own, you have big families, don't you? And this is one of the problems, I'm sure Akhlaq will touch on this, is this perception, these preconceived ideas that as Asians, as South Asians, as Muslims, we have these extended families, and we look after our elders. Maybe that construct, that narrative still exists, perhaps, in the native countries in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, but certainly in the UK, that notion, that concept is definitely changing and evolving. But I'm going to leave that bit to Akhlaq to talk about. Sadly, my mum became really ill. I'm getting used to this wobbling, I feel like I'm on the boat. Around Christmas time 2015, with the dementia and the COPD and pneumonia. And after a week in hospital, Mum's health deteriorated even further. She was becoming increasingly unresponsive to medication. So I decided to speak to the ward manager, a chap called Eddie, about Mum's prognosis. And I asked him to be completely honest with me, and he was. Eddie explained that what was happening with Mum and the effect of the IV medication, her heart and her breathing, he said that the prognosis was not good at all, and it's likely that we would only have Mum for I knew this would happen, excuse me, for a short time because of the symptoms she was presenting with. But I had many very frank discussions with Eddie, and he would explain that from his experience, not many BAME, Black Asian Minority Ethnic or Muslim families either wanted to talk about end of life or even consider palliative care. And at the time, he made it. I made it very clear that I wanted Mum home with me and my family, and the response from the nurse who I spoke to was amazing. She said now that we had decided that we wanted Mum at home, that she could start the process of transferring Mum almost immediately. So I informed my family and relatives about the news and said that the staff were very happy for Mum to have as many visitors in the hospital as she wanted. And during one of the visits I noticed there was a butterfly symbol, laminated piece of A4 attached to the cubicle curtain, and the curtains were closed. And when they entered, my niece told me that the ward manager had said that it's okay to keep the curtain closed if we wanted to, if that's what the family wanted. And on entering the cubicle, I noticed another laminated A4 piece of paper. It kind of informed people and people in the ward that the person in the cubicle had received significant news, that was the word I remember quite vividly, and or is very poorly, and to be respectful. I believe the butterfly sign has now been placed by, is it a swan? I thought it was such a beautiful and a delicately explained message. I also thought it would be useful to have the written sign attached perhaps on the outside of the curtain, or some text on the butterfly sign to make the other patients and families aware of what the symbol actually meant and what it represented. This was Christmas time, 2015. I was really anxious at that time whether the transfer would be able to take place before Christmas. It was the holiday season after all. The ward nurse had passed over the transfer to the NHS transfer nurse. I forget her name. She was really supportive and explained everything that would happen from there on. And to be honest, I was really surprised to learn that some of the paperwork is still faxed to other departments within the NHS. And I recall the transfer nurse saying to me that she was struggling to get hold of a person that she was needed to fax this thing across to, but she was persevering, and she was extremely professional throughout the whole process. Whilst everything else was going on in the background and the transfer had been arranged, I was able to spend some time in the cubicle with Mum, and I feel blessed that I was able to speak with Mum kind of one-to-one. I then kind of headed home to make the necessary arrangements to receive Mum and to move the furniture and all the other practical logistical things that you have to do. During the course of the day, I received calls from many people, including the OT, who wanted to know if we had a carbon monoxide detector. We didn't, but we got one. If the room was big enough to allow access on all sides, it was. The bed company phoned about delivery time. The oxygen delivery man called me to arrange the drop-off. The carers contacted me, as did the transfer nurse. You can imagine I was a bit hectic. This was all going on while I was worrying about Mum. Extremely overwhelming. I was in Bradford at the time for a meeting in the morning, actually meeting Akhlar. You probably won't remember this. This was on the day Mum was arriving home, and I was on tenterhooks and I couldn't lose sight of my phone. Now, had myself and I, my son and I, not been able to move or rearrange the furniture at home to accommodate the bed and the equipment, I think we would have been stuck. I think that there needs to be some sort of service that's made available to assist families with the practicalities of someone being transferred home who's end of life. I'd hate to think it was an older person or someone with a disability or someone with no one at all, unable to move the furniture. The morning of Mum arriving home, I went to the GP surgery to have Mum transferred back to the old family doctor. The practice manager and the GP were brilliant, really supportive, and the paperwork was ready for me to sign when I arrived at the surgery. The ward staff, the occupational therapist and the transfer nurse were absolutely fantastic. And given that the transfer home arrangements took place a few days before Christmas, we had Mum home on Christmas Eve. The bed, the oxygen arrived in time. The bed's air mattress was somewhat temperamental. The alarm would go off and we couldn't work out how to turn it off and why it was bleeping. Even the nurses said that they couldn't work it out. So we were left with a beeping bed mattress throughout the mattress being at home. Mum arrived home on Christmas Eve, transported by St John's ambulance. It was a challenge to manoeuvre Mum into the front room because she was brought in on a wheeled ambulance bed. It wouldn't turn into the room. In the end, we had to use a scoop to transfer Mum into the room. Not very dignified, but we were kind of stuck. Mum was home for about 3 p.m. and we had all the notes from the ambulance crew, but there was no handover. There was no one, no nurse, no doctor who either came with Mum or was waiting for her with us, just to ensure that she was okay and to support us. So we felt a little bit abandoned and isolated when Mum arrived. We didn't have any intervention until early evening when the hospice at home nurses from here, from the Spring Hill Hospice, arrived. Extremely professional, and they took charge straight away. Quite by chance, our GP also arrived home to check on Mum while the hospice nurses were with us. The hospice nurses checked the medical notes and they noticed that Mum's prescriptions hadn't been signed by the hospital discharge doctor. Luckily, the GP had only just left and they was able to call him, and he came back and he signed the paperwork and the prescriptions. So at this stage, Mum was comfortable and was only able to respond with eye movements. Whenever I introduced my children, she'd acknowledge them. When the district nurses arrived, do we have any district nurses here today? Oh, hello. They hadn't brought the syringe driver for Mum's pain relief, but it came the following day. So Mum was in visible pain for that 24 hours. I think the rotation system between the hospice nurses and the district nurses does work, but I wasn't quite sure at that time what and how their respective roles differ. other than the hospice nurses work only until a certain time, and the district nurses are on call 24/7. I may be wrong, but that's our experience. The issue I had was to try and contact the district nurses after 7 p.m. I was having to leave voicemail messages. I think in cases where they look after long-term, i.e. non-end-of-life patients at home, the system of answering machines, I think have changed now, but at that time, probably works fine, but for end-of-life cases, I really think there has to be some sort of emergency mobile number that families can contact. Don't think it's particularly nice or easy to leave a message on a voicemail machine saying that your mum or your loved one has passed away. So mum passed away sadly with the whole family around her on Christmas Day. Now I had to remain calm and collected and composed in order to make all the arrangements and to contact everyone that needed contacting. Thankfully, I was previously informed by the hospice nurses that I had to call 101 to report the expected death. Now I emphasise expected because I didn't know the difference. I didn't know that there was different types of death at the time. I was also reminded to inform our GP surgery to ensure that they had uploaded the expected death status for mum on the NHS system. Otherwise, it would have classed as an unexpected death and caused unnecessary delays. Now, this is something I wasn't aware of until the hospice nurses advised me. As Muslims, we have to try our best to arrange the funeral as soon as possible after death. And we can talk more about that later, and Clark might touch on that after. So in order for me to do that, I needed the district nurses to visit and to remove the catheter and the syringe driver from mum. This, again, I had to ring, leave a voicemail message during a very upsetting time for everyone around me, crying and distressed, as you can imagine. It was really difficult for me to remain composed. I collapsed later. When the district nurses arrived, I assumed they'd done everything that they had to. And I suppose there was this awkwardness as well, with some of the district nurses not feeling comfortable, I suppose, entering their room because we had family there. And they weren't quite sure whether they were able to come in and ask if everything was okay. So I think in those circumstances, it'd be great for any professional to kind of ask the family, shall we come back later? Can we come in? Can we do whatever we need to? But because of that awkwardness, I think perhaps judgments were lapsed at that time, and I'll tell you what I mean. Okay, so the following morning, when my wife and other female members of my family were performing mum's final ablution, known as a ghusl, and this is a ritual that we go through before burial, they found that the nurses had left a needle in mum's leg. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but it was very possible, and it wasn't a very nice thing for family to see. And I think this is because of the panic at the time and the awkwardness in terms of what do we do. Pretty much soon after mum had passed away, we started to receive visitors at home, and these are people from the community come and pay their respects. And as Muslims, we open our doors to anyone, and this official period of mourning lasts for 3 days, after which we're meant to regain some normality and reinstate the furniture and whatever else. Although this rarely happens, we had people visit us for weeks and months afterwards. The other issue, perhaps because it was Christmas, was that we were stuck with the bed and the oxygen tank and everything else in the room in which people were sitting and paying their respects, saying their condolences. The equipment wasn't collected until the new year, so I think it was about a week before the stuff was taken. I think we can expedite the removal of equipment as soon as practically possible after a bereavement. It would be extremely helpful for families and visitors, especially as the equipment is in the way, practically, but it's also a reminder of the fact that the person that you love, your mother, your father, whoever, is no longer with you. Also, I think providing some cultural and religious awareness training for end-of-life care staff and people such as yourselves would be really beneficial, particularly so that you can understand why we have to bury our loved ones as soon as possible, and the reason we have the 3-day mourning and many other nuances within our culture. During my chat with Eddie, the ward manager, like I said earlier, he explained that he doesn't come across many BME families that either want to talk about end of life or even consider palliative care for their loved ones. So along with cultural training for professionals, I think there needs to be more work done, at a community level with mosques, community centres, and I wouldn't say community leaders because no one leads me. I don't have a leader, but these are people that are prominent within communities that you can go and talk to. So there needs to be more advice, and I suppose often I have this conversation with Jane as well. You know, I don't know what your take-up is at the moment when it comes to BME, but often it's about reaching out to those communities and not saying, well, they don't come to us. So perhaps the way you approach your communities needs to be changed. That's me done, really. I'm happy to take any questions or any queries from anyone.
I
think you've done a great job.
Things have changed since and changed for the better, and partly because of the experiences that you've had.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Jackie would be able to say about the SWAN card.
Yeah, so this SWAN model replaces lots of land, and basically, whereas it was planned as a symbol, the SWAN is like a model of care, so it's around
Right.
the setting, so consider the environment, sensitive communication words, actions, and we have a saying step outside the box, so it's what we're trying to encourage staff to do is ask what's important to the patient and the family,
Sure.
and then try and meet the needs, so it's things like somebody wants emergency wedding,
Mm-hmm.
you can organise emergency
Right.
wedding. And then we also have the spiritual care team on site. So what we say to all staff, it doesn't always happen admittedly, but we do try to encourage staff to contact the spiritual care team to offer, if they need religious support,
Right.
spiritual support, and also emotional support. So we are, I think in the trust, we are trying our best. But
And in the community, they're giving them the SWAN card, so
Right.
you know the difficulties that you had in contacting district nurses, you can ring up now and say it's the SWAN call, and it will go straight through then.
And just I suppose the roles between the hospice nurses and the district nurses, has that been more defined and refined?
Yes, I think it's ongoing that, and I think the roles vary for each family because some people want
Right.
or need, you require more support than others. So, but they do explain, you know, what
Who
their
does
roles
what.
and how they relate to each other.
I mean, we found the service, you know, absolutely brilliant. But just in terms of, so what do you do and what do they do? I think that was really confusing for us as a family, and given the fact that it was, like I said, really hectic. We had I had so many people ringing me at that time.
Yeah.
It gets a bit overwhelming. And then you have to, you end up becoming a bit of a pharmacist, carer, a bit of a doctor, but also don't forget my father, my children, a husband, a son. So it's to have this support. I think it's really good, but I think it just needs to be tuned up really a little bit.
The other thing to mention as well is that for district nurses, there's no answering machines now. It goes straight to the spa doc.
Brilliant.
So you do get a voice at the end of the phone so you're not able to leave messages, which is another positive step.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the issue around the expected death. I think I can't remember the nurse's name, who was an absolute angel at the time for us from the hospice. And I wasn't aware of this, and had I not flagged it up with the doctor, apparently the police would have turned up and the coroner would have got involved. And that's really important, I think, to get that message to families that, if it is an expected death, to let your doctor know that it's been updated.
It is important to have these conversations, but I think with the issue with the drug sheets not being signed as well, it just shows that it only takes one part of it to fail, or to, and it can affect the whole
recall your memories of the...
Absolutely. And the alarm going off on the mattress.
Yeah.
We couldn't work it out. We asked the nurse if we could do that. And so it was Christmas week. We couldn't ring the person who dropped it off to say, have we turned this thing off? Or have we set it up right? So we were kind of left with it, the person gone, and we were kind of stuck with it until the new year.
So, can I come back to you on that? The equipment contract that we have in Rochdale, there is a 24-hour on-call, so you would have been able to ring that provider. And we've also, what we've done now, we've introduced emergency collections as well at times of bereavement.
Things have improved, aren't
Yeah.
Chuffed. That's great. Thank you very much.
And quite a lot of that actually is down to yourself and other people that have had experiences that have shared, you know, the fact that things haven't gone so well, and you know, so that we can work together to improve it.
Can I ask, how's that information disseminated then to people? You know, if you're the family in the hospital and getting on home, and you know, how do you know that there's a 24-hour collection point? And it's not the thing that I'd be thinking of. So
that's quite right. Yeah. So
I guess it's like kind of a key leaflet or something.
There isn't at the moment, but that is certainly something we could start looking at. That's a good idea. Yeah.
District nurses are certainly aware of all of that information.
I'm sure they are, but but if you can't get hold of a district nurse to have that conversation, it's about having that information yourself.
So
you know where you're ringing.
Well, yeah, because I was able to kind of, make decisions from families who may not have anyone, or not being able to speak English, perhaps. Could be in any situation. Disability, learning disability. There has to be something that's legible for them to understand what they have to do and who they can ring as a one point in contact. And for me, it was the hospice.
What might be useful, and kind of connecting to the next bit really, is that, and always to what you just sort of asked, and I'm okay taking a bit longer than need to be. Would you sort of say how you've used that experience in terms of sort of the way you said how do we get the message to the fans, or as a champion for that work, how are you that expert in what you do now?
So the work we're doing at the moment since then, we've linked in with the Rochdale Council Mosques, and Jane's been really involved in developing a booklet with the Rochdale Council Mosque, which advises families on what they need to do when somebody passes away from the Muslim community specifically. We've developed it to an extent now where it's almost ready to be published. However, the new coroner, I can't remember her name, I think she had some issue in terms of the procedure around the coroner's involvement. So rather than the Rochdale Council Mosques assuming things or saying, well, this is what you have to do, I think they've asked the coroner to make any changes to that before the book's published. And I've been involved in that, and one of the things that we're looking to do is just set up this one-stop shop for all Muslim families. So hopefully be at the mosque building, the new mortuary that's being built currently. And there'll be an office there, and it'll be manned by an individual who'll have all this. Because one of my concerns is when the loved one passes away in the Muslim community, and I'm sure you relate to this, Clark, is there's very little grieving that you can do, because like I said, as soon as mum passed away, we started seeing, visitors, somebody from the community, family coming around, and for 3 days, often longer, you don't have time to think, and you don't actually have time to grieve that your mum's passed away. So I think one of the things that we're looking to do, and working with Jane very closely, is to develop some volunteers in the community, a male and a female, who can provide that. What would you call it? Just pastoral support. Yeah, anything to say, are you guys alright? Are you coping? Because we don't really have that at the moment. So that's the kind of work we are doing at the moment. But we're at the mercy of, I won't say it, but certain individuals in the community. But it's not for lack of trying.
Can I make a point? It's all in the trust. With my colleagues been involved in devising like a faith death procedures to say if somebody dies or they are out of hours at weekends and they want a timely burial, or they want to do somebody wants to do a vigil. So we're trying to cascade that to all staff as well.
Just a quick point, I do get the vigil information stuff in hospice. I can never attend it because I was on the Friday
It's
afternoon.
always a Friday,
It's Friday prayer, so I can never attend that, and I'd love to come along because it comes with Mum's name, and
yeah.
so it's just that's the point.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much. I think we all got something there from Shahid's story, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the other work that we're carrying out here in H&R. But I'd like to now introduce, if I can, Akhlar Rauf, who's come from Bradford and has done lots of work within race relations and so on. So I'll let you introduce yourself. We'll put your PowerPoint up. Okay.
You usually sort of think that the thing will be in front of you, so I've not printed any slides, so you'll have to excuse me, I'll have to keep going like that to remind me what I'd said. So I've just as the slides are coming up, so I've spent about 19 years working for social services in Bradford, but working around information, particularly around minority communities. And then about 13 years of that time has been on something called Meriade, meaning my memories. So I don't really talk about Meriade here, but because there's no word for dementia, we had to find something that the communities would link with. And then if you think of South Asia of about 1,000 miles across, with lots of different faith groups, different languages, you know, social economic factors, all sorts of things. How do we find something that cuts across all communities and would come up with Meriade, meaning my memories, and then people can sort of say, well, what about memories? And therefore we'll say, actually, it's one of the symptoms of dementia, and then try and normalise the word dementia. So what I'll talk about really, and I kind of put this into the title so it's clear for everybody that a lot of what I talk about is the same for most families. You know, what we've heard Chai talk about is personal to his family, but it could be anybody's family. You know, if you take away the fact that Shahid's family is of a Muslim background, of a Pakistani background, you could put anybody in that position, and you know what the learning should come out of there will be similar to what most of us will feel. So the work that we did around dementia ended up giving me an MBE, and I kind of point that out because somebody somewhere values what we did, how we did, and why we did. And I think that then almost like entitles me to sort of say, I must have some kind of expertise. So what I tell you, hopefully, there isn't going to be anybody that hears, oh, actually, I strongly disagree with that because X, Y, Z. So it's all about the learning. The other half of my life is the fact that I'm sort of just started the 4 years of a 4-year part-time PhD looking at how South Asian carers cope with caring. So a lot of the learning that comes out of that is also embedded in this. And I did bring this document with me. Whilst I'm here, I will sort of go at lunchtime, but there is an email on there that you can contact them. It's free to download, or it's about £5 to buy from them from Alzheimer's Europe, and I was involved in helping produce this. It's just come out end of last week, early this week. Development of intercultural care and support for people with dementia from minority ethnic groups, and that's from across Europe. So the learning in there is also about, well, some of the stuff that I talk about will be in there. So if you wanted to have a read, and it's got academic references and things like that, so that'd be really useful for you as well. So let's see if we can do some justice. You know, who are the BME? I mean, Shahid said black, Asian, minority, ethnic, but who are they? You know, is it about people of colour? An MP, you know, this week saying, Amber sort of talking about, you know, coloured women. Just forget her name, Diane Abbott. So he's talking about women. He says, oh yeah, especially coloured women. You know, which is a very old-fashioned term to use. But we have a joke amongst like me, my friends, and whatever. We say, well, actually, we're all of a colour, because I might be darker, but then if somebody's more pink, I never say to somebody, you're white, because actually nobody's white. She put a sheet of paper, nobody's white. But actually, is it about colour? Or is it about recognition that there is some kind of difference? And amongst minority groups, it's a bit like lady there earlier on says, oh, well, you know what, I could think maybe you've got some Irish background. And he said, well, I have. That we all have assumptions about the other. So what I will talk about, don't just think about South Asian families particularly, because that's what my background is, but I've worked across all minority communities in the sense that whether somebody's of Central Eastern European background, what are their needs, how do they communicate, how will they access services, or is it that, and here I will say, white practitioners, so white English practitioners, that might see somebody's colour of skin and think, well, actually, she's white, she's okay, she, came in the 40s, 50s, whatever, she spoke English, she married a white guy, from here and everything's fine. Actually then, end of life or, later stages of dementia, she reverts back to her, Polish or Ukrainian, then what happens? So, those sort of things to think about. And of course, if there's ethnic minorities, there must be ethnic majorities. So if I'm an ethnic, you're an ethnic. And sometimes when I hear people talk about ethnics, I'm thinking, well, which ethnic? So sometimes it's about some of our own ignorances that can come in, whether it's deliberate or otherwise. And the other thing I think would be important here is, so there's lots in my presentation that you'll be able to pick up elsewhere. There's, my email will be there, there's things in here. So if we skip over things and stuff, don't worry about those. So I think some of the important learning is in some of the simple things. So, what's culture? Is it only, brown, black people who have a culture because they have funny foods and funny languages and might dress funny and whatever? Or do we all have a culture? So I was talking to an English lady yesterday, and I was trying to say to her, so if my mum was to say, what's the English culture, what's she going to sort of say? That you have a fancy, cup and saucer, old, English china or whatever. And she says, well, actually, if you just think of that in itself is a bit of a stereotype, because somebody else down the road sort of says, I don't know, this is me saying this really, but that, well, they have potatoes with everything, whether it's, mashed or chipped or whatever. Things like I was saying to her that as we were growing up, Friday was fish and chip night, and then as an adult, when I'd hear English folks saying that, I'm thinking, is it a cultural thing that people did? Did my mum and dad sort of do it because they were now living in England, or did they just do it because they thought, well, all right, mum's cooking during the week, it's end of week for dad, we'll just get a takeout. And this other one that really gets up my nerve, to be honest with you, is when I hear people talk about community leaders. So whether this is about end-of-life care, Shahid talked about he had to go to a mufti, somebody who could make almost like a legal judgment about whether you can access care or not access care. Is that a community leader or is that a community champion? So in communities, and I will ask you this, that who is your community leader? And if anybody's got a community leader, would they please put their hand up? Because I just want to know who that community leader might be. But so if I then said, who do you think? I mean, I know you probably won't say it if I say, who's Shahid's community leader. But if we think of minority communities, we say, so who are community leaders? We need to reach out to community leaders. It might be somebody from the mosque, it might be a counsellor, it might be, their GP. Well, actually, if you don't have a community leader, nobody has your voice, you have your voice. Why should somebody else have a community leader? Nobody represents me. If somebody wants my opinion, they shouldn't talk to my counsellor or my imam or whatever. They should talk to me. And that cuts across everything, whether that's about your child's education, whether it's about your healthcare, whether that's, what you think of politics in Britain or whatever it might be, that, we talk to the person directly. You might have community champions, but no such thing as a community leader. And what's a worldview? So it kind of goes into some of the academic arguments here that I think I touched on this a bit later on, so if it does come up, I'll skip it, then I'll mention it here, is that people will have opinions, as we all will, but some of those opinions are formed on experiences. So again, like your migratory experience, so somebody that moves from one country to another will carry things. In fact, what comes to mind, I'll mention this actually, you might find it funny, you might not, I'm not sure, but is that, for example, in the Western world, it's much more about a nuclear, personal, me, the individual kind of perspective. Where do I fit in things? The Asian culture is much more about the family, so it might be about what somebody else thinks, what's their influence on us. The African culture, so there's like Eurocentric, Asia-centric and Afrocentric, and the African is you know, what kind of summarises that is that it takes a village to raise a child. It doesn't really matter who that child belongs to. Everybody has that share to put in. So I was in where we kind of talked about this in Alzheimer's Europe conference, and I was just sort of thinking, how do I start what I want to say? And I asked them a question. I thought, so I'm from England, in the south of Spain. So I asked them, who here sort of thinks that, you know, I'm the son of Pakistani immigrants or Pakistani expats? And I wasn't really looking for an answer, but my point to them was that if you're English, living in the south of Spain or Dubai or whatever it might be, why is it that some communities are expats and some communities are immigrants? And to be honest with you, after I finished talking, I think people were a bit hesitant even to use the word immigrant to me. And I thought, well, I haven't got a problem with immigrant. You know, my mum and dad chose this place. They were invited to come here. They came here. They made a life here. You know, we're a big family, 7 siblings. You know, you used to talk to Irish friends that sort of say, well, actually, you know, we have big families. But all of us work as professionals. So my mum and dad's contribution to this society makes us no less than anybody else. So, and why should we therefore feel secondary? So if somebody uses the language, and I kind of talk about language because when you hear words or you use certain words, there's an impact on the other person. You know, if you talk to, and I'm a chair of governors of school, and I once said to them that I would love to see the Union Jack in our school reception area. The head teacher was sort of like mortified that you can't put the Union Jack in reception. And I says, well, not that we ever did, but I said, if these kids, high Pakistani Muslim kind of background in that school, they will have ownership. They will see that this flag belongs to them. They are part and parcel. So it says on the one hand, he's talking about British values. They're also the same as Muslim values. But you're not telling these kids that actually these values are the same as their home culture values, but you're almost saying there's an us and them. And people can't always see those dynamics of our subtle acts might have a profound impact in different ways. And then this thing around colonisation of the mindset is that even amongst minority communities, I was just hearing something on BBC Radio 4's Coming Over, a book that's kind of come out in America that they said, I think in the next sort of 20 years, 30 years, the whites in America will be, the minorities and, the impact that'll have and things like that. And I'm thinking, actually, there's a mindset amongst minority communities where, and I'm sure you agree that, like the old British India, the white person was a Sab and a Mam. Sab was like, sir. So it almost created this like subservient culture. So my mum's generation, as they came here, weren't going to be argumentative. They weren't going to be challenging because they thought, actually, life ticks by. It's great. Thank you very much. I don't want to cause trouble. Along come her kids that have had an English education. It says, oh, hang on a minute. The policy says this. Your rules say this. I don't want this because I have a right equal to somebody else. And all of a sudden, you start to see this thing, you'll all see in like GP practice and things that, no harassment or violence or whatever, against staff will be tolerated. And I myself have been in a position where I challenged something in GP practice and it was raised as a complaint. And I thought, before I get struck off, I'll write a letter in. And in the end, they said, oh, it's a bit of a misunderstanding. All it was really was that I was trying to be assertive to say, actually, I'm the patient. I've not been difficult with you, but, you'll get paid on patients. I'm a patient here. You provide the service. And it reminds me of something when I did my first degree that somebody around bureaucracy said that there was like a job club somewhere and they said, well, if we want for these unemployed, we'd get our work done. And this is a bit similar that practitioners, whether we're social workers, nurses, whatever that level might be, we often sort of think that the people that we're serving or meant to be serving, they're making our life difficult. And we forget that actually for public servants, we're here to meet those needs. So instead of thinking, well, actually I can avoid, and we say, oh, they're hard to reach, and we kind of talk often about actually they become easy to avoid because we'll do the bits that we're comfortable to do and the others bit won't. So I'm going to try and rush through some of the other bits and hope there's some time for questions or there is some later on. And to try and like link it in with hopefully some of the learning that you'll have today. There's lots of kind of barriers really, but a main one for me is a bit like the chicken and egg, and all kids ask the parents and wherever, come on dad, can you answer that, chicken and egg, I always sort of say to them, of course it was a chicken because the chicken laid the egg and whatever. So where did the chicken, that chicken come from? And when you lose, you say, well, God created it, end of. And I think for me, in terms of work, when I first came into social services and I worked around the information, was that people saying, well, they don't use our services. They won't, you know, they won't, what's the issues? I'm thinking, well, how do they know that your services are there? And unfortunately, we're almost like, I don't know, 15 years into the service, there was a different service manager that said, why won't they use, they're the Asians, why won't they use our residential homes? So it says, well, when you drive past a mosque or a gurdwara or a mandir, do you know what happens behind those closed doors? Well, no. So how does, I don't know, my mum driving past that residential, how does she know what happens in there? How does my siblings know what's behind those closed doors for them to make a decision about, actually, would we ever put mum in care? So the message there is about, back to I think somebody across there was asking about those messages, that we have to have a two-way flow of information. I'll touch on equality on the next slide. I'm not one for having things translated really, because I think, although people often talk about English as a second language, I mean, I like this bit because you didn't say it, I can say it. So sometimes people have seen that, you know, Shahid and I are the same person. However, we often talk about, even in Punjab, one part of Pakistan, that Shahid's community is very different to my community. Shahid's Punjabi, that one of those many languages across the country, are two different languages. You know, some of our cultural bits are very different. And it's interesting because, I mean, I've grown up where people say, oh, they look the same. And we've had that, haven't we, really? People think the same. But the message there then becomes, if you know your community, so if you knew that this Punjabi, that both of us will speak a different dialect. So I think of my mum. So my mum comes to England, she has basic English, but if you say, right, what language can I give you the information in? And she'll say Urdu. Does she speak and read Urdu? No, she doesn't. But the Punjabi she speaks is not a written language. So if you ask for Punjabi, you're going to give it in Gurumukhi, which is a Punjabi spoken across the border on the Indian side of Punjab, which is a written language. So she'll ask for it in Urdu, takes it home, and other kids, not all of us, can read. I mean, I can read Urdu, but she said, oh, well, you know, I've got this. And we'd say, well, actually, if it was written in plain English, then the kids can read it, you're informing them, and they can talk to the mum and sort of say, well, actually, oh, you know, mum, this is what it's about, and this is what it says, and why it says. And you're actually starting to look at a family-centred approach as opposed to a person-centred approach. And that is also, not from a language point of view, but as a personal-centred, that's something I'm trying to build in within the PhD, that practitioners have this thing of, the form has this little bit here that says next of kin. You can only put one name in there. I come across carers that will say, depends what you want to know for. Is it about managing the medicines? Is it the appointments? Is it taking to the appointments? So it's about transport. You know, if you want to talk about the care, you talk to my wife. If you want to talk about her appointments, you talk to me. You know, if it's whatever, you talk to my other sibling. So it becomes family-centred. But what we could say is that who is the right person to speak to, not necessarily who's the next of kin. If you think of not all families live in extended homes, but if grandma has dementia and granddad's still there, actually her next of kin might be granddad. Granddad might not have much of a say in the family because his son's doing all the running around, and son don't really do much because it's his wife that does the cooking and the caring and the cleaning or whatever. He's just a spokesperson. So you can see how quickly we talk to the wrong person within the family. But you might find a champion within that family that takes your arguments forward and says, these are the differences you can make, this is the influence, this is how we can change things. I touched on migratory experiences, but that really also links through to experiences of racism as well. So if you've had a negative experience, what it often creates is this fear of institutions. And just like most families, irrespective of who we are, you know, years gone by, you think, you know, social work, you know, they take kids away, they take, you know, older people into homes and whatever, and no matter how much we would say, do you know how much it costs to put a child in care, how much it costs to put an older person, people weren't interested. There's all that negative kind of connotation. So I think some of that is historical as well. This, I like this because I think it kind of sums up more or less what this presentation is about. There's a number of slides and I kind of keep looking at the time, but people talk about equality. You always hear about, you know, the Equality Act, and, you know, it's about the same for everybody else, and, you know, you have the same rights as everybody else. And I sort of think that's very different to equity because, I mean, I don't need to say much really here, but if these people are looking at this baseball game, one box each, it's fair. Nobody would disagree with that. But the issue is, so let's say in terms of end-of-life care, if you're trying to promote your services to support that family, and you put the same amount of time for different families, you kind of put the same sort of resources for the different families, and then you're asking why aren't they using the service? And I think what it needs is this equity, that those that have access perhaps don't need that same amount of resource put in because they'll know where to go, they know who to contact, they know what the process is. Listening to Shahid, I just learned that I didn't even know there was this thing about you ring up people and say that, I forget what you called it, that death thing that he'd said. Expected death. So when my gran died, I'd done a master's by then. I was doing a master's when she had dementia. Even when Dad died about 16 years ago, no idea of any of that. And again, a bit like you thought about the grieving process. So Dad died, well actually he died in hospital, Gran died at home. He died, I'd gone to the cemetery, and then all of a sudden I was told, actually the people that are here from other cities and towns want to pay their respects with their family, so 2 of you need to go back home. So I'd gone to the cemetery, coffin's there, so me and youngest brother cry all the way home, because his dad's burial really. And I'm thinking, these people can, won't say what I said, but say do one, that I couldn't give monkeys about these people. I don't care who they are, wherever they come from. But it was a done thing. Somebody has to go home. And then you come back and all you see is a pile of muck there. And honestly, I tell you, it probably took me about 13 years, although 16, just to accept that actually, okay, it's all right to let go. And, and people have often said, you're always smiling. So I think, well, we all have experiences. If you don't smile, you cry. So what do? You just keep going. And I think, therefore, this bit here, is that the reality is this. It's the ones that have access, have lots of access. Those that don't, that we think actually we want to create a change for, because we're scared of asking them anything, because we're scared of, upsetting or, creating a situation where somebody's going to put a complaint in, or they said I was racist, or whatever it might be, we tend to ignore, or we'll try and look for an expert that's going to say to us that, actually, what should I do? And I often say to people that, what do you want for your mum? What do you want for your kids? What do you want for your grandmother? I don't want anything different, but what might be different is what you put on the wall in that institution, whatever it might be very different, or the food you put on their plate might be very different. But we all want, them to be loved, cared for, to be, safe, they're secure, and so those issues are the same. Again, kind of just trying to link it back to your training day, is that, what are some of those issues? And it was interesting, Shahid and I did some training, I can't remember, was it last week? Yeah, last week. We had somebody in the audience who took offence to a carer's story, where the carer said, well, the OT didn't do this, and the OT didn't do this, and whatever. And the person, well, don't they know we have this waiting list, and it's all negative, but that's their reality, and that was a working professional. And it taught me that actually my experience is very much similar, that I could work in social services, but not really know how to access services, because I've never really had to. And yet, I tell you, it still happens at home sometimes now. Somebody knock on my door and say, you work for the council, don't you? Can I just ask you about planning? And you think, okay, but because what happens, it goes back to trust. You go to people who you can trust, and you think, actually, and I tend to sort of say, well, actually, if you ring the council, there's somebody sat there and they'll give you advice. You don't even need to tell them who you are or what your question is, what you wanted to do to talk to them. And then the other thing was about this, when we talked about worldview, is that amongst the Western world particularly, but in fact most of the world probably, is that there isn't this notion of jinns. There might be this notion of ghosts and spirits, but for Muslims in particular, there's a third creation of the 3 main creations. So you have the angels, you have humankind, and you have jinn kind. And jinn kind is the nearest way I can kind of explain that is that, if you ever saw that genie programs or genie in the lamp or whatever, it's this like spirit that can change and whatever. But actually in Islam, it's seen as a third creation, like humankind and with angels. But the jinns can, sort of the spirit, can possess your body. So some people will go to, we often sort of talk about charlatans, or somebody will say, come and talk to me, I'll give you this and give you this, but it'll cost you whatever, we'll get them fixed. And dementia is also a bit like that we will cure this. And those of us that sort of like try and challenge some of those notions and say, well, actually that might be happening, but actually go also talk to your doctor. There's no harm in talking to your doctor and talk to whoever if you want to. But for somebody who doesn't understand that concept, will just think that these people are crazy if they're talking about possession, or possession by what. And the other nearest I can think of that is where people might talk about voodoo, so, you know, like witchcraft and whatever, particularly sort of some of the African countries, that somebody somewhere is sticking needles in you or whatever, and that's causing something. This thing is quite big around what, you know, neighbours, friends, family think, and that will influence whether you get care or you don't want to access care. Do you know, hide this person at home? You might be struggling with end of life, but actually will you access some of that care if you're worried about what your siblings are going to say, what your neighbours are going to sort of say? Care institutions, dignity issues. If you, I touched on that a little bit earlier on, that, you know, if you have this fear of will they look after them in the same way that I would? Will they give them that love and give them that attention? Will they understand what they want? At least if it's at home, it might not be perfect, but at least I know I'm doing it out of love. Again, that might be no different to any community, but across the minority communities, there is this strong notion of, well, actually, I don't trust these organisations to be able to deliver. And some of that goes back to what I said about migratory experiences. I did touch on social constructs, but the thing around care really is that it can either be seen to be virtuous, so you might be struggling, but it's an opportunity for you to do some good and therefore earn brownie points for later in life or in your next life, so therefore you'll struggle to continue to care. Other people will say, actually it's a burden. So if you put it into, you know, generalised, but say into an English family concept, it might be, I didn't marry you to have to do this at the end of life, or it might be that we've lived a brilliant life together and, you know, loving and whatever, and it's my duty to care and obliged to care. So some families may have a choice, some families don't have a choice, some carers don't have a choice. So I go back to who's the spokesperson that makes that decision. And that kind of links back to that role of faith. Some carers will feel that actually this is a bit of a punishment. Is it a punishment for me that I have to do this? Is it a punishment that this person's got dementia and God's punishing them for whatever they might have done and now they've got dementia? Or is it an opportunity for me to do some good? And by me caring for them, tomorrow my kids are going to care for me. So if I was to ask my son, I mean he's 13, but Mel's daughter is 20, they would say that, Dad, you know, if we could care, we will care, but the day we can't care, we'd have to think about, you know, some care institution. But if I look the other way and see mum, would I ever put my mum in a care home? But I accept this from kids because I think, well, yeah, actually, times are different, generations different, whatever. But I'd never want to put my mum in care because that's my mum. That's no different to anybody here. So as long as we can care for her, we'd want to care for her. So something around partly role of faith, but also how families think about the construct of care. I think we're going towards the end. What I really wanted for us to focus on is that I myself would want to shift this balance of power, as we call it. That so we might be here today thinking we want to learn how we can support some of these families, but actually it's the people sat here that have the power. Because, for example, if you're a social worker, I was saying a bit earlier on, that how you do your assessment, what comes out your assessment, what decisions you make about what support that family, that carer, you know, might be able to access. Do they know that there's a carer's assessment? You know, do they know that they can, you know, talk to a social worker and say, well, you know, I want to know what I can access, and if you can't provide it for me because it's not culturally appropriate, is there a direct payments type of service where actually I can buy in what I want? Unless they access that information, which means we have to give them that information, then they can't make an informed choice. And my view really is that the onus needs to shift back towards the people who deliver services. So it's not why won't they use our services, like why won't they come forward. It should be the other way around. It should be a case of actually they're wanting services, how can we work with them, how can we make them sort of tailored in such a way that actually they're comfortable to use them and we're happy to provide that service. This open door access is quite a funny one really, because as part of the research I was kind of reading something, and Actually, it was this side of the Pennines. I'm just trying to think where it was. Because Shahid and I often talk about who's on the right side, and you know, Yorkshire's God's own country, which you know. But there was, I think it's a social care institution. I think, I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, this manager said, "Well, it's not our problem. Our doors are open." You know, and I'm thinking back to that thing about, if you don't know what happens inside a mosque, how do you know what happens? And in the same way that if somebody feels our services are great and our doors are open, and if they don't want to come forward, well, that's not my problem. That's just Jobsworth, isn't it? That Jobsworth person needs to say, actually, if I'm not getting the right kind of community sort of proportion from our community population coming through, what are we doing wrong, or what can we do to improve things? And the best way is to actually talk to communities, and that's no different to saying to people, actually, I think Shahid was touching on this, you know, can I come in? Can I do this? And I often have this example that I use is that, particularly for men, I think they kind of struggle with this, that if you're going to go to a home, let's just say it's a Muslim home, the woman's opened the door, do you say hello, do you shake her hand, you know, whatever, and I sort of think, well, actually, isn't it easy to say if she sticks her hand out, shake it, and if she doesn't stick her hand out, don't. You know, and you know, common sense kind of thing that, you know, it's a bit like we say, you know, some people, you know, hug people, some don't. You know, what do you do if somebody's moving forward to hug you and you say, like, oh, actually, I don't want to hug them. You know, we shouldn't overcomplicate things. Organisation culture is also important in terms of what you look like. You know, who are your staff? What are the sights, the smells, the noises in an organisation? So the younger generations, that, you know, particularly that are born and brought up here, that have had the education here, will understand systems, processes, organisations, cultures. But if I was to have brought my mum here with me today, and I say, well, what did you think? She'd say, oh yeah, you know, it's a white organisation, it's a white place, because she wouldn't see those sights and smells and wherever. And if I'd say, well, would you come and use a daycare here? So, well, if there's other people like me, I might, but if I'm going to be the only one, then I wouldn't be comfortable. And that would be no different to somebody, let's just say, an older English woman living in a city area with high BME population that services, you know, more and more users a BME. There was a piece of work I did in Bradford, and I was saying to some people in an inner city patch that, you know, so do you knock on, you know, Mary's door and ask Mary if she's okay? And, you know, you've got a car to go to the shops, can you get her milk and eggs and wherever? And there were a few people that say, oh yeah, and I'm thinking, but you would do it if Mary was a Pakistani. You wouldn't even think about the fact that Mary's there. So it's not the fact that Mary's different because she's white. Mary's still part of that community. And so sometimes I think it works across both ways, where we forget who we are and where we are. I touched on this family centre, so I'm going to skip that one. That, you know, can we move away from which the person that's at the centre of stuff, put them within that family context, whether it's a nuclear family or an extended family. And I think this other bit, particularly as I see my kids growing up, so between 13 and 20, the three of them, I'm where my parents were, where they didn't know how to record on a video, and we used to sort of think how thick, you know, you've got a video and you can't record it, it's like press 2 buttons. And honestly, with smartphones, and we think, you know, we're tech savvy and whatever, and I always say to them, but, you know, we were the generation that saw computers come in, so we gave you all this. And then I have to sort of say to them, and how do I do this then? And how do I do that? Whatever. Oh, Dad, it's so simple, you know, whatever. I think, you know, I'll just stick to what I know best. But the reason why I put that there is that if you can share information, so I mean, I hated Twitter. A few years back, somebody dragged me onto Twitter. Now I have friends that say, bloody get off Twitter. I always tweet. But it's great for networking, it's great for sharing information. It's also great for, you know, sharing frustrations, because you might say something that somebody else will pick up and say, that actually this is how we bring it back. And I want to kind of just remind us really with this one, so I'll just make sure that is the last one here, is that if we're talking about palliative care, what are the implications of what have we talked about? So really it's some kind of summing up really as well within this. That what we do, is it about short-term goals and tick boxing, or is it something that's long-term? Is it something that we're going to have a strategy and say, you know, our population's changing, you know, the diversity's changing, or whatever it might be. What does it mean for us? How do we change things? It's important for you to think about the concept of care and of death. So Shahid's talked quite a lot about his mum's experience, and I'm grateful, Shahid, that you've talked about that from a personal perspective, because it's personal to everyone. some people are very strong, some people are not very strong. I'm second eldest. My eldest older brother does nothing for family. But I was in bits when my dad died. I couldn't kind of think of what to do. And, this expectation was, well, you're next eldest. And my sister said, yeah, but you've been dad after dad. And I was thinking, actually, but I don't want that responsibility. I want to say, he's the eldest, go to him. So how might that impact decision making? And do we access care? What do we want? How do we want end of life? What do we want to happen if he dies, she dies? Those decisions. Do we talk about death? Palliative care, sort of thinking between, are we providing care or are we obliged to care? For many carers, they're stuck on the obligation to care. And one of my supervisors, she's done a bigger study around obligation and willingness. So many minority communities feel that they're obliged to care. So they'll come in whether mum's in hospital or in a care home or end of life, wherever it might be. But actually, are they willing to have that task? It's a bit like me saying, well, I didn't choose to be second eldest. I didn't, if the older one can say, I don't know what to do, why does it have to fall on my shoulders? Your relationship with your community is really important, whoever they are. Some of that's about education. So I was talking to, I think in Kirklees with an organisation. I said, look, what you might do is contact a community group and say, we're having an open day. Why don't you come along? Have tea and biscuits with us. What that starts doing is to introduce them to what is your organisation, what do you do behind these closed doors. You will be able to talk to them and say, what does this place look like to you? Would you use it? Why wouldn't you use it? So you're building relationships. Family care often seems to be superior to paid care. It is what happens in most families. I've talked about faith in end-of-life care, that strong relationship, but you can always go back to families and say, well, we will help you with what you want. But I've also, from a dementia point of view, come across a verse in the Quran that talks about people going to old age and forgetting after having known much. So I'm starting to think if I can push that in my PhD and say, well, actually, particularly for Muslims, your faith talks about dementia, so why aren't you talking about dementia? To help normalise it. And then this last thing around seldom heard groups, whether it's LGBT, whether it's minority groups, people living out in a village, out in the sticks or whatever, they need to be seen and heard. So that has to be a reflection, whether that's in service users, it's the families, it's the people you engage with. You might have colleagues from different backgrounds, and talk to them and let them kind of guide you and say stuff. So it's not about you just sort of say that, I don't know, a white person comes to an Asian wedding and says, right, I'm going to dress up in a sari or whatever and they fit in. That's great. But equally, it's about saying, so why do they do that? And who's that and what's their role and why is it? That inquiry builds up our knowledge. We don't always have to go to formal training to be told stuff that's common sense. Or at least I say it's common sense. Let me rephrase that. Rocket science, not common sense. The two might be very different things. So if you're ever not sure, you ask a colleague. And I'm sure most people won't be offended. They probably prefer that you ask rather than make some assumptions. I'll leave some contact details there. If ever there's anything that you sort of think, oh, actually, I'm not sure of this or whatever, like I said, that, if in doubt, ask. If in doubt, ask me, and I've no problems in coming back to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Are there any questions?
Stunned.
Do you think the demographics within the South Asian community are changing? As that, you mentioned that did you have 7 siblings?
Yeah.
Do you think that is, with this generation that are current, do you think that the families are becoming slightly smaller?
Yeah. So my, obviously I tell you, my family always says, why do you always bring family into your talks? I think it makes it real.
Mm.
So because my parents, actually my dad was one of 2, but his father died when dad was about 8. But my mum's family was a big family. Most migrant families, whatever nationality, when they move, tend to have had bigger families, and that's all about their social economic kind of situations. But so as I look at our family, the biggest family is my older brother with 4 kids, and we say, whoa, you've got 4 kids. Most of us 3, 2, and that is the family. So whether you call it part of your education, your westernisation, or whatever it might be, but actually family circumstances change. But the other significant thing, I think, is rather than in terms of demographics of numbers, is that there's a change in the type of community. So, the next generation is very different to my generation, to my mum's generation. So what role does culture play? What role does faith play? I can go, and one of the questions I do ask people is that does faith have a role in how you care? And it's interesting that those who are more practicing tend to say no. But then when I ask them, so how, and there's a Sikh family comes to mind as well, so when I say, so how do you cope, what's your coping strategy? I want to learn, how do you manage all the stress? And I say, well, I read my prayers, I do meditation, I ask God not to put me in this position. So you talk to God, but you say faith doesn't have a role. But you ask the youngsters, not really interested in faith, and I don't mean from a practice point of view, but they say, well, actually, it's my right to have this, it's my right to do this. If mum, if I'm going to struggle with mum, I'll put in a care role. I ask my son, and he'll often say, because me and Mrs. are divorced, and I sort of say, well, would you care for her or care for me? Just to wind him up. And he gets stuck because he sees this obligation that actually he might be expected to have to care for one of his parents. So we always end up with saying, well, actually, son, you've got to work hard, become a dentist, buy 3 houses, you live in Minutes, she lives in there. And we have a laugh about this, but actually what he won't see is that there's this kind of acceptance that I'm not expecting to live with him or for him to live with me, or whether he'll be looking after his mum or not. So where does his mum go? Where will I go? Will I have family support? Will I be on my own? We don't know. So I think the question is about how are families changing. So the next generation, definitely, there's loads of particularly Sikh women on their own, Sikh men take the bottle, or whatever, and there's the issue of dementia with there. So we can't, in the same way, to generalise, but in the same way we can't say that it doesn't happen. At one point families would sort of say, in fact Minister 2 years ago, they look after their own, and we're all challenging it. But there are families who look after their own. So I think there's no right or wrong, whichever it is. And I go back to that point, talk to people, ask them what works for them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, we do a lot of work in the community here. I love going out to the community groups, and I quite like that some of the ladies, when I go to the ladies, they're fabulous. They let me call them auntie now, so I'm on. I mean. But yes, so lastly this morning, I'd like to introduce Michael Banner. Can you do that? Who's come all the way from another country. Haven't you? From Wales.
I'm not making this any easier for you.
To speak to us this morning, so I'll let you introduce your role yourself, if that's all right, man.
See you later. I have good news and bad news. Bad news is my voice will not get any better during the talk. The good news, I'm going to finish at 11:30. I'm going to be brutal about the times because I know that you think Jane is a dear, lovely woman. She's been brutal to me. And if I don't finish at 11:30, goodness knows what's going to happen. Also, that will get in the way of questions and, more importantly, the lunch. So I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of what Marie Curie have done. You're going to get to watch a video, and then if it's okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. You okay with that? Generally? Cool. My name is Michael Banner. I'm a project manager for Marie Curie, and the project that I'm delivering is improving access to end-of-life care and palliative care within diverse communities. People with dementia, we've talked about that a fair amount today. The improved access is about people with learning disabilities, all faiths. I'm going to talk about equality data and challenge you a bit on that, and also talk about, and also listen to you about outreach and engagement. With regard to dementia, some of the things that we've done in Cardiff. Anyone heard of Dementia Friends? How many dementia friends in the room? Cool. We've got a staff of about 100 in Cardiff. About 80% are dementia friends. We are striving to become a dementia-friendly hospice. Can anyone define what dementia-friendly means? Is that a tentative hand up? Okay, dementia-friendly, I don't think it's got a particular definition. It just means you do things to make sure that people who have got dementia don't feel worse. They don't get confused. We've covered our lifts with film so that people with dementia don't see a reflection of themselves, because occasionally that can confuse people. Now, difficult about talking with dementia, you say people. It's a very fluid condition. Not everyone is affected. But the things that we're doing to become dementia friendly is we're taking off reflective signs. We've got a more clear signage around the hospice. A lot of the stuff we call dementia friendly is actually just people friendly. It's just about being able to deliver our services more effectively, but be able to ensure that people understand how we do them, and also allow people to get around the building easier. So, anybody heard of dementia-friendly communities? Is that or not? Am I hearing things? Jane, do you want to give us a quick definition? Okay.
I think it's about awareness, isn't it, for the general community about some of the issues that people and the carers with dementia might face.
Yes, Jane says no, and then actually does exactly what she said she was going to do. But it is about raising awareness about dementia and how it affects people and what you can do within a larger community. So at Marie Curie, our hospice in Cardiff, we are members of the Dementia Friendly in Cardiff and also in Penarth. Dementia training. Has anyone been on specific dementia training? Dementia friends? You put your hand up. Is it okay to point to you?
Yes.
How was it for you?
It was very illuminating, really, yeah. But forgot what I thought. I think the training that happened specifically within faith, within church community, sort of looking at inclusive church and how we can do church better for people.
Yeah.
Want to come out.
And can you take that experience and use it elsewhere, not just within the church?
Absolutely transferable.
Yes. The dementia training that we've got for our staff is a specific and bespoke package for palliative care nurses. It's being developed by a woman who's dementia trained and a nurse. So we've got a really good package, and that's actually been franchised to us. She's given it to us free, but it's been hugely successful. We've raised much more awareness about dementia within the hospice. Our staff are more confident. And essentially, that's how we're going to increase our ability to deliver a dementia-friendly hospice. Local links and networks, they're just incredibly important. We've worked very closely with the Alzheimer's Society. In our project, we use some of their, I don't particularly like the term service user, they're just people. But we've used people with Alzheimer's to help us with our project as almost an advisory board. And they've been wonderful. We've got good insights. We've learned a great deal about that. Apologies, I'm whizzing through this. I'm going to go off script. Is that okay, Jane? Splendid. Jane doesn't know the script anyway. Anybody fancy asking a really difficult question? Any clinicians in the room? I haven't solved that terribly well. No one wants to answer a really difficult question. The confidential inquiry into people with learning disabilities, deaths of people with learning disabilities, they found that almost 100% of people who died in hospice care with learning disabilities weren't told that they were going to die. If you're a clinician, and I have learning disabilities, and I'm in a hospice, and I say to you, am I going to die? What do you say to that question? Anybody want to answer that? It's horribly difficult. So, bless you. Thank you.
I would ask what makes you think or what makes you ask that question.
I've heard that people come into the hospice and don't come out again. So, am I going to die?
Well, I would say that the hospice isn't just about death and dying. There's lots of good things around. But again, I would ask you, what specifically is making you, are you worried about dying?
Is
Well,
there something that's frightening you that's making you ask me that
annoyingly, this
question?
woman is really very clever. But I said bless you a lot, and relax and nothing, I'm allowed to do that. I'm gonna push you. Forgive me. And am I gonna die? Yes or no?
Eventually you will do.
Am I gonna die? Yeah.
Yes, and if you want me to...
I wish you
to
hadn't
discuss-
answered this because you've answered it too well. God bless you for that. But the difficulty is that that's a very hard question for a lot of clinicians to answer. And we've had two different experiences. We've had a person and his sister is on the advisory board. He died in our hospice. He had learning disabilities and he was never told he was dying. Was that the right thing or the wrong thing to do? The wrong thing. Anybody say it was the right thing?
Did he want to know?
Pardon?
Did he want to know? Some patients don't want to know.
It's a good question. Who said it was the wrong thing? Sorry. No, absolutely not. Why not? Why was it the wrong thing? Are you okay to answer that?
Yeah, I think because you can phrase difficult answers in ways that are appropriate, and I think you can take the fear out of something where you describe it. And I think most people, or the majority of people, would want to be able to know that truth so that they can prepare themselves for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm making this difficult particularly because the chap, bless you for that, the chap who had learned this didn't have the capacity,
Yeah.
right? So it's not an easy question to ask or answer at all. You need to take a multitude of issues into place. It's about capacity, it's about the needs and the wishes of the families and the carers and the next of kin. So are you putting your hand up or are you just stretching? You're allowed to stretch. So it's a very, very difficult question, but it's actually an increasingly important question because there's no right or wrong answer, but you will get asked this at some stage, so you kind of need to prepare. Wait. Advisory panel, right. Accessible information. Did I say that we're going to show a video? Did I say that all right? Oh, before you press play. Actually, just press play. I'll tell you about it later. Yeah, sorry about that.
Welcome to Marie Curie Hospice in Cardiff for the Day Off. Marie Curie is a charity that helps people with similar illnesses and their families. One way Marie Curie helps to care for people is in a hospice. This video is about Marie Curie and its services.
Hello, my name is Faye. I run the staff nurses at the Marie Curie Hospice. So our role here as nurses involves caring for patients with a long-term condition which they're likely to die from. This involves palliative care, a term that is quite frightening for patients and their families if they don't understand what it means. But it essentially means caring for them as a whole person, looking after their needs, their individual needs, which means meeting their symptom control or their spiritual, social needs as well.
In the hospice, you might stay in a single room or a shared room. If you stay in the shared room in the hospice, you will always be placed in a shared room with somebody of the same gender as yourself. If you are coming to stay in the hospice, you will be able to bring your own personal possessions to make it more homely for you.
Our outpatients department is a place where our patients can attend a training accompanied with a family or carer, should be introduced to our clinical nurse specialists, who can then refer them where appropriate to other members of our team, which include complementary therapies, for example, reflexology and hypnotherapy.
My name is Amy Smith. I'm one of the staff nurses on Brownsville Ward Hospice.
If I was a patient in the hospice, how would you help me?
The first thing that we do when somebody is admitted individually tailored, and we will plan their care together with the individual and come up with a plan that suits each person.
What can they do by saying after?
There's lots of things to do. As a hospice, as everybody works here, we really strive to make it a really positive environment for patients and their families, and this involves daily activities, tailored to people's individual needs. It could be that somebody really does quizzes, so we'll get them quiz books or puzzles. We understand that days can be quite long, so we try to entertain them best we can.
If I stay up after, can I go on the day?
We would make some plans together, make sure that you have the medication you need and that you have somebody to support you if you need somebody to be with you. And we would make an individual plan for you to spend time outside.
What's the layout besides being here?
So the chefs here are incredible at facilitating meals that may not necessarily be on the menu for that day, but it might be what the patient really wants. And this could be fish and chips or macaroni cheese, and also they make lovely scrumptious cupcakes, and there's a different cake every day. But it's important that patients are aware that whatever they'd like to eat, then as long as we have it or we can facilitate it in, then usually we can make sure that they have that.
If I was to be a patient in a hospice, it would be really important for me to be able to have a cover. Is that possible?
Having got to see you can be very important to people, and we appreciate that. That's okay. And you would just have to let us know. The trolley comes around regularly at breakfast time, and mid-morning, and after lunch, and mid-afternoon, and after supper. If you want to see in the meantime, you can let us know, and we will be able to get one for you. And there's also a patient's lounge that you might be able to wander along to and make yourself cover there. So no problem with getting to you whenever you need it.
If I was a family member or a relative in a hospice, would I be able to make contact with somebody if it was in the middle of the night to check that my family member was okay?
Of course they would, and that's really important that everybody is aware that hospice here is open 24 hours, we provide 24-hour service, and we understand that especially in the middle of the night when it's very quiet and you might feel alone or they're worried about their loved one, that it's important that they know that they can pick up the phone and one of us will be there to answer and that they reassure and support them.
My name's Becky Lewis. I manage the Allied Health Professions team here at the hospice. The Allied Health team are a team of people who do lots of different jobs. We've got occupational therapists, physiotherapists, social workers, and a spiritual care coordinator. So occupational therapists, they help with you, help find out what's important for you, and the things you're not able to do so well anymore because you've been ill or someone you know has been ill. And try and look at different ways of doing things. Physiotherapists, they help with the more physical parts of you, so help with help you walk, keep walking stiffly, or getting in and out of bed, anything to do with your body moving. So with social workers, they've got to part of their job, not only to help you decide what care needs you may have or someone who you're looking after, but they also provide emotional support. So the things that you find upsetting or difficult to understand, because they're encountering a tough time, they can help you with these and try and help you talk through these things. The spiritual care coordinator, she works with you to help find what's important to you, what values you have, and what beliefs. It could be religious beliefs, it could be non-religious beliefs, and how these affect your day-to-day life, or how they affect the way you behave.
Marie Curie also helps with care for people at home.
It's very important for you to choose where you're hired and not in a hostage. It's nice to be at home so you can relax and feel family and friends around you.
Marie Curie can also care for people in their own homes. The main reason we care for people at home is that's their preferred place of care. They want to be surrounded by their family and belongings. So going into a patient's home allows us to provide a very personalised, individual care package for a patient, offering them holistic and patient-centred care. So our senior healthcare assistants go into a patient's home and offer hands-on care. They assist with personal care and washing and dressing. They assist with pressure relief and make sure patients are repositioned and emotionally support the patients and their family.
Don't be afraid to ask questions. If there's any questions you want to ask, don't be afraid to ask.
The reason why we put that film together was because the people that you saw there, all from Cardiff People's First, and they said, you know, we were printing information and it wasn't really accessible for them. And so we talked with them and said, what works for you? And they said, well, do easy read stuff, Michael. And so we did easy read booklets. Weirdly, most organizations want an easy read rather than an executive summary. There you go. They said, we don't process information like everyone else. We're more visual. How about making a film? So we made the film. That was Emily. Emily had a phobia of hospices in particular. Emily narrated it. Emily's always there. She's an absolute star, as were all the rest of them. Sadly, coincidentally, she was back in the hospice recently because her uncle died. But the reality is that film is directed towards people with learning disabilities. But I'd like to hear your views on the film. What did you think? Is it just for people with learning disabilities? Who's it not for?
I can't think of anyone it would be for.
Bless you. That's the right answer.
Well, I was learning from it, so, you know.
Well, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to raise awareness. We're going to put that on our website. We're going to send it out to organisations to say, this is what we do, this is how we do it. The spiritual care coordinator, people were talking earlier about religious needs, cultural needs. She will work with all the families and their relatives, friends and loved ones and the various religious organisations, chapels, whatever, in the local area to provide the spiritual and cultural needs of that person and of that family. So that's the link that we have. Just coming back to learning difficulties. One of the things that we've done, there's a chap who died in 2009 called Paul Ridd. He had learning disabilities. Essentially he was neglected because he had learning disabilities. The case went to the Public Services Ombudsman. A damning report was produced. As a consequence of that, Paul's siblings, Jonathan and Jane, put together a foundation and they produced a folder that's in every hospital in Wales, and it's about communicating with people with learning disabilities. It's a great folder. We are using it to train our staff to build confidence and awareness, because no matter how much experience you've got about life, when you've got someone with learning disabilities, in a very sensitive and pressurized environment like a hospice, it will need more advice, more training, more confidence, more knowledge about how to plan and give care to those people. Whizzing along. We okay? Any questions so far? You're going to save until later. Cool. Equality data. Somebody mentioned earlier the Equality Act. Can anyone tell me when that came into being or into force? Do you know, if you're going to get the right answer, do you want to just put your hand up first? No, it's okay. You're absolutely right, 2010. Can I ask, do you collect equality data where you work? Yeah, some people do, some people don't. Those who do collect it, what do you do with it? Those that don't collect it, why don't you collect it? Hey, we're not going to go there. But it's a question you could do with actually thinking about it at an organisational level. Collecting it is good. Collecting it, not using it is bad. Not collecting it, well, that's just not good. Hey, we've covered that already. One of the things I noticed when I've done a few of these talks, I've also been to the Hospice UK conference in Telford last year. And we did a poster about our work with learning disabilities. And we were quite proud of our work. We've done very well. We've done very well with regards to Marie Curie and equality, in Cardiff particularly, and that's branching out. And we think we've done very well on equality within the hospice sector. Went to the conference, everyone's doing the same stuff. There was 18 posters all doing exactly the same stuff. And I just thought, well, why don't we share? But then I realised, and I'm new to the hospice environment, weirdly, we can be a bit competitive. Somebody smiled there, bless you for that. Sometimes we are competitive at the cost of being collaborative. And I think we don't necessarily have to repeat stuff that's been done years ago to actually work with it today. We don't need to keep researching stuff when we've got the answers from years ago. So I think, actually, let's move on because I'll make my point. Finally, that essentially, Jane, that says just about the same that your report says from the CQC?
Yes.
Yep, it's exactly the same. We've been saying that for a while. Anyone want to have a guess when we said this? At Marie Curie. There's a clue here. We used to be called Marie Curie up until Marie Curie Cancer Care, up until 2014, but now we're just Marie Curie. And if I told you that we said this in June 2013, you know, we've known about it for a long time. We're not necessarily doing a great deal about it in the wider hospice field 6 years later. We don't actually need any more research, do we? We know what the problem is. Very quickly, coming back to outreach and stakeholder engagement. What we found is that I can go and talk to groups and they'll listen. If you go, you will get a different response to me. Why is that? You.
Me?
Yes, you.
I've always got a uniform.
Yes, you. And that's it. Take someone with a uniform and you get more people turn up and they'll get engaged. I can get people through the door, you'll get them to stay in a uniform. Of course there's a role for people who are not clinicians, of course there is in stakeholder engagement. But if you're going to actually engage with various communities, learning disabilities, different faiths, take someone in a uniform. And the trick is, you go to them. Don't think they're going to come to you. They won't. And there are barriers. I was interested when somebody said about community leaders. It's a phrase that annoys me because I don't think there are terribly too many community leaders. But there are some community barriers. And we've done talks, we've gone to conferences being Marie Curie, and we've set up our stall, and it's like an exclusion zone around it. And people, especially in learning disabilities, where people with learning disabilities have got multiple morbidities, they've got huge health concerns, their outcomes are worse, their lifestyles, their life expectancy is shorter. Everyone knows they get very bad care. They get access is poor, their outcomes are poor. We go to a conference, Marie Curie stand, no one comes to us. Everyone kind of knows what we do, but they don't want anything to do with us because they're almost scared of it. Parents of people with learning disabilities, they are protected, and goodness knows I'm not going to criticize anyone for that. They would like to be protected. But they're shielding people from the truth about this. And that's a really difficult decision. It's not for me to say this is right or wrong. So getting information to parents and organisations, learning disabilities especially, it's very difficult. You've got to get out to those groups. It is 11:31. Jane, I know you've never been brutal in your life.
We're all right till 1:45.
I rushed for nothing.
That's to include questions.
Thank you. Well, I rushed for nothing. So, any questions for me, or should we just wait and get questions for us all? I'm really keen to hear a bit more from you guys about the film, about your experiences with stakeholder or community engagement. That was a ringing silence.
I think the film's very powerful, and I actually think that all organisations can learn something from that, because I think that most people now go onto the internet to search for information when a loved one is poorly or at the end of life, and I think that a video like that would put someone at ease rather than just seeing a page that's just all written information.
You know what people say back in the day, it makes them sound like old, I know they said old people. I'm quite old. Back in the day, we put a lot of information in different languages on paper for all these community groups. And then I thought, well, I'm not entirely sure that everyone actually, because they can speak a language, can read it. And that's true. We've got a draw, embarrassingly, about 300 videos for similar, but it's about for black and minority ethnic people. We've got a drawer of about 300 DVDs. Anyone got a DVD player? Yeah, exactly. So we're going to put that video on the web. We're just going to send it out there. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
Well, I suppose it's all right. I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you all for the 3 presentations that we've had this morning. They've been very informative for me and interesting. In terms of engagement now within Greater Manchester and reaching out to the various communities and vulnerable populations that we have, I know that one of the things that we're looking at doing now is creating almost sorry, the word's gone out of my head, for want of a better word, a Bible kind of thing with contacts. So we are trying to create those links into, that's going to be running across Greater Manchester, and that's something that's starting imminently.
I think
a directory, that was the word.
In Marie Curie, we've got a booklet, a multi-faith booklet for palliative care. We've got booklets, what to do when somebody dies. We've got a whole range of information and support available on our website. I think the directory is a good idea, but just be a bit wary. It's a bit like a car MOT. As someone who drives old cars, it will be out of date the day after you make it. And somebody needs to keep it together, somebody needs to keep it up to date, and it's not going to happen. And I think the other thing, a bit of a slightly political point, apologies, that different community groups, black, learning disabilities, faith, we keep having projects. Don't want projects, we just want access to services. We don't want a specific project to deal with our needs. I don't know what my needs are. We don't want time-limited projects. We want to be part of mainstream service provision. We don't want services just provided via the big lottery fund that are time-limited for 3 years and then you forget about it. It needs to be embedded within mainstream service. This is where the Equality Act comes back together. The Equality Act says, can anyone sum up the Hippocratic Oath in a couple of words? Bless you, who said that? Was it you in the background?
It was me.
Sure, absolutely right. Bless you for that. Do no harm. Sums up the Hippocratic Oath. Can anyone sum up the Equality Act in a few words? Go on, you know you want to.
I was just going to say, do not discriminate.
Yeah, kind of, but it's more than that. Do not discriminate. Back in 1990, Scottish Homes works with Housing Association of Scotland. They had an equal opportunity statement. And I remember it because it said, we will not discriminate on the basis of any grounds. race, sex, gender, or sexual performance. They actually meant to say sexual persuasion. I thought that was really kind of them. Yeah, you'll remember that. We've moved on from those bland statements. The Equality Act says, don't discriminate, and actually go one stage further. Prove you don't discriminate. Remember at school, you've got to show you're working out. The Equality Act says, show how you are not discriminating. Show how you're doing steps to ensure that discrimination doesn't take place, to ensure that people have equal access. The Equality Act is a powerful tool when it's used. You've got to collect data. You know, organisations that don't collect data are in breach of the Equality Act. That's a fact. End of me banging on. Any other questions, or can I sit down? Can I sit down?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much, Michael. Are there any questions for all our speakers this morning? No? I think with regards to BME, you know, we clearly need to raise awareness in those communities and within those communities as well. And one of the barriers that I've found within the South Asian community is actually with South Asian GPs, because they've probably been here a long time. Their culture, if they were, you know, if they weren't born here, is from their, you know, original place of birth. And they automatically think that, oh, the families will take care of them. And when we go to the gold standards meetings, it's often having to prompt the GPs, well, do they need the palliative care services? Do they need to come to day hospice or some of the other services? And they'll say, well, no, because the families just do all that. Well, no, they don't. We've said families are changing, and it's more difficult. It's not as easy as it was, just like it when my grandma was, she had dementia, and she used to spend a month with our family, with me and my mum and dad, and a month with my auntie. But that was a long, long time ago, and that's how it was then. Families could do that, but these days things have changed, and and it's changing within all cultures, isn't it? So it's not just work from us reaching out into them, but it's also around looking at the professionals in those cultures as well to make sure that they're up to speed with how things are changing. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this morning. Lunch hopefully will be out there quite shortly. So if you want to network, I have what the weather's like out there. It's dry, so we'll open the door. So if anybody wants to go and stretch the legs and have a walk round. But I'd like to thank all our speakers this morning, because they'll be going shortly. So thank you very much. In our seats for just before 1 o'clock, because we will be starting again at 1 o'clock, and then we can finish on time. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to find another leg, it's somewhere in the store.
Or take another leg off.
I'll take one off.
Take one off.
I'll take one off.